Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a beautiful Wednesday evening, or maybe it's Thursday morning or Thursday afternoon, wherever you happen to be, but it's evening here in the Enchanted Forest. It's evening at Unicorn Fields. Good evening, Sandra Herrick.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How is it over there in New Hampshire?
Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect. This was a perfect summer day. It really was. And I was just describing to you that the sun is setting, but that means because my back deck faces the east, that we have these beautiful hills. And so the sun has just been kissing the top of the hills. And I just love being out here at this time of night. No bugs. Hallelujah. I just took a swim in the Au Naturel and took my outdoor shower. And so it's like, you know what this place looks like. I am taking advantage of it. It's just wonderful.
And that outdoor shower of yours is an envy of mine.
Oh my God, you could do it at your place so easily.
Yeah, I love that outdoor shower. There's nothing like it when you're showering outdoors at Sandy's. They're nestled in the mountains, and it's quite breathtaking, especially in the autumn.
Oh my God. And believe it or not, we have color already in the trees. So, adios summer.
Hard to believe already.
Hard to believe. Yeah, we found our first colored leaves the other day. They're creeping in the trees down in the back there over the fence. And the ivy out in the front yard is already getting colored. Your favorite tree's got some color in it already. And it's like, we wait so long for it, and it goes so quickly. But, we'll have another 8 weeks before we can consider snow.
Thank goodness.
I know, but it's been incredible. It's been a little bit muggy here, and but today was one of those great days. And of course, I have a convertible, so nothing stops me unless it's really blistering from putting down the top and just whiz banging around. It's like having the horses, literally. Mm-hmm. So what's it like at your place?
Well, it's beautiful
photographs
here.
Of your place. It's astounding what you and Todd are doing.
Exactly. Yeah, Todd created a 5-tiered garden terrace, and we put the last pieces of artwork in it yesterday. Some beautiful sculpture, fresco sculpture, and so it's quite extraordinary. So we've been working on that, working with the land. And, keeping ourselves restored by working with the land and on the land, and keeping our balance and keeping our sanity by doing all those wonderful things in the forest and in all of the gardens that we have here on the land. And we were just talking about before the show how much we just enjoy not only working with the land and creating the gardens and putting in the art and all that sort of thing, but to take it in and to feel the difference in our bodies working with the land. And I know you're the very same way there at Unicorn Fields.
Absolutely. Bobby has the most beautiful garden this year, and we're eating out of it now. And the tomatoes are spectacular. He had someone come and literally work their fingers to the bone, putting in ground cover and stone and really refeeding the beds. It's a high quality garden this year. I'm just so proud of him. And I'm painting the house. So talk about getting out there, and I was scrubbing the garage doors and, washing windows and getting dirt that's been on there for years down. And I don't know if you saw my Facebook yesterday when I bought myself one of those ladders that bends this way and that way and this way and that way. And so I can get up in the nooks and crannies. And we had somebody come and spray all the wasps and hornets the other day, thank God, because they were really starting to harbor a whole bad attitude. And so, I'll be able to paint until November, until it gets down to 60 degrees. Mm-hmm. So I got that ladder so I can get up higher and start doing all the other stuff. But it's been a labor of love, and it gets us out and it moves us.
Yes.
I do the lawns, I do the yard, I do the pool. I help out with the animals. And at our age, we need to stay limber. Otherwise, we get in trouble.
Limber, that's the word, limber.
Right. We can't take our bodies for granted at all. It takes me a while to navigate the ground when I get up.
That's funny. That's going to be my word for the next few days, limber. I like that word.
Yeah. Work on it.
So, Sandy, when we were talking yesterday, we chatted for a moment about, so what do we want to talk about tonight? And you chose the subject of, let's talk about common sense.
Yeah.
Well, there's a subject matter, common sense. And I first want to say hello to everybody who's already in our chat room. Lily and Tara and Jessica and Lady Hawk.
Ladies, how are you?
Yeah, good to have you in there. And anyone who would like to join us in the chat room, you are most welcome to do so. We always enjoy that. And for those of you that are just sitting back and listening in, welcome to the show tonight or to the archive. It's good to have you. So, Sandy, why common sense?
Because we've lost it.
Mm-hmm.
It's, it seems to me that we have come to this place where we really have to know our own mind. And we have to find a place in our mind that we are aware of that is able to decipher through common sense, through comprehension, through enough information that we stay intact, that we don't run off into fantasy or into disbelief or into being swayed into something that doesn't have the, how do I want to say that doesn't have the power to drive us away from something that just makes logical sense. The United States has gone crazy. I don't know about the rest of the world. I know there are crazy things out there, but this has become so intimate and so personal where people's logic no longer makes sense. It's irrational. It's spontaneous in a way where it's self-serving or based on information that, whether it's political or scientific or something, the common denominator is gotten lost somewhere. The thread of this is a truth or this is a reality has gotten lost. And Bobby's family, God bless them, they're from down in South Florida. One of their great lines is, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, that doesn't make sense. And the other day, Bobby said, it doesn't make sense. And I said, to you. It doesn't make sense to you. And it gave me that opportunity, and this is the long way around to why tonight, is that how do we have a conversation with anybody, all this, if common sense isn't available to what is mine that brings me the sense of me, and what is yours that gives you your sense? And is there any commonality in what makes sense so that we can get along, that we can survive? Mm-hmm. So that's and when I said to Bobby, to you, it doesn't make sense to you, but to me, I can sit here and explain it to you. Are you available to listen? And that, I think, is one of the precious moments between us where he goes, well, explain it to me. And when we're given the opportunity to be logically safe in speaking our realities, it makes sense. Because the information was given without being hostile or without making somebody right or wrong, or there was no doubt, there was certainty. And I feel grateful because, in watching children grow, that when common sense starts to develop into their brain, you can watch them figure things out because logic happens. Mm-hmm. So what is common sense to you? How do you work with it, or how do you seek it out?
Well, for me, common sense is about balance. And it is about weighing all of the options. And it's about weighing information. and in taking in a variety of information, weighing it, and coming to a conclusion. And I also think that there's a component here, Sandy, about common sense that sometimes we might forget, and that is, are we thinking out of our childish mind? Are we thinking out of our childhood mind? Or are we thinking out of our adult rational mind, weighing information as it is currently available? What was common sense in the 1800s and that might not be common sense right now. Common sense when we're 5 years old may not be common sense when we're 55 years old. So I think that, to your point in the beginning of the show, how are we looking at a situation? How have we lost our mind? Have we lost our mind? Or maybe we need to ask ourselves, which mind are we utilizing? A childish mind, a childhood mind that's thinking the way that we were taught in our childhood? Or are we present in the here and now, looking at a variety of things and asking the question, why does that make sense to you? Why doesn't it make sense to me? And we don't all have to have a commonality. There can be variations of. Right. So to me, common sense has a few components to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I loved what you said when we were talking the other night of that it depends on the kitchen table you sat at.
Right.
Or you sit at.
Right.
I mean, that really is a metaphor for what state do you live in, how were you brought up, who's talking to you, what logic was offered to you, or what was given to you as your education. And I agree, how were you taught as a child to figure things out, or were you told what was, and therefore that's all there is? And do you have the capacity to learn after you've been taught on your own?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is that place where the authority said, this is it, and you're not supposed to question it.
Right.
And for me, common sense developed with, wait a second, I know I was obedient to a certain extent as a child, but when it was no longer logical for me as I grew to have those rules take my life from me or guide my life because it didn't make sense to me anymore. It didn't have the logic for my life. Am I being disobedient? Am I being irrational? What am I being? I'm developing a personality. I'm developing a character. I'm developing my own point of view.
And exactly. I love that. I remember one of my greatest moments of common sense happened at Mass.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good place.
And it was a funeral Mass. And I was at a funeral Mass, and I was 20, I'm going to say probably 22 or 23.
All right.
And I remember having the aha common sense moment in my life at this funeral Mass, looking around at the people at the funeral that I knew were not Catholic. And I remembered sitting there thinking to myself, hey, hold up a minute. Common sense tells me, now that I'm looking around here at all these really wonderful people that I know and love who aren't necessarily Catholic, that maybe more than just Catholics go to heaven.
Holy God.
Well, I hadn't really put a whole lot of thought into it before then. I just hadn't, because I was young, I was doing other things.
Right.
And it dawned on me. And I remember I should have been paying attention to the funeral Mass, but frankly, I wasn't. Because I was sitting there in my own aha moment of common sense, not thinking like the 8-year-old being at her First Communion, right? Or the 15-year-old at confirmation, but as an adult going, wait a minute here.
Right.
Common sense dictates something different than maybe what I'm hearing or what I've been hearing my whole life. But to your point, Sandy, that also then includes the ability to look beyond, at least consider beyond the scope of a point of view that you've always had because you just always had it.
Or that's what you were told it was.
Bingo.
You know, it's there's that place where you play with fire, you get burnt. Well, that's common sense. But, you know, you tell a child, it's like, you know, don't touch the heat. And they're going, why not? Ow!
Exactly.
And so common sense to me is also based on someone's ability to even have the capacity to explore and figure, have that observatory brain that develops the skill of logic or investigating so that you can understand and find out more information and come to conclusion. Because there are a lot of things that are, I mean, let's talk about astronomy and looking up in the, you know, the sky, if the sun comes around us, it doesn't go, all that stuff. What became common sense in time was considered hearsay. I mean, people were burned at the stake, and it's astounding when someone literally thought, no, wait a second, it makes sense that this is happening. And if the masses say, no, it's not, you're in trouble.
Yes.
And so common sense is, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with an aha moment. Mm-hmm. Where all of a sudden you see something that makes more sense in your observation than what you were told in any form of limitation, and not including the bigger picture.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, in looking at that, I was thinking about our show earlier. I mean, some of the things that you and I take for granted as common sense in our day-to-day, other people may look at us and think, what are those two crazy?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Because in our common sense view of things, I'll speak to myself, in my common sense view of things, I don't go a day without including spirit. And for some people, common sense says, well, yeah, you include not spirit, but you include God, and that's what you do on Saturday or Sunday or maybe midweek. And that's what you do. So why do you do that every day? And for me, the greatest thing about gaining common sense or common ground is conversation, good conversation, where we can discuss common ground. And I do believe that some of that has been lost. I'm a fan of Cyndi Lauper. Mm-hmm. And so tonight on Facebook, she was making a statement that, you know, yesterday she posted, or this morning she posted just on her Facebook page, remember to register to vote, which is a pretty innocuous, thing to say. Register to vote. I mean, that's a right we here in America have, is to vote. And she said that the most ugly comments she had ever seen rolled onto her Facebook page to the degree that she actually did a small video saying, hey, hold on, wait a minute.
Wow.
Yeah. And so common sense or common ground for a good portion of a whole lot of people right now is not something that's available. Everything is so polarized. But to come to a common ground means that we have to be open to at least ask the question without shouting, without getting our ego butthurt, but with an open mind to say, you know, maybe there's something I could learn here. Right. And maybe I'm not going to like it, but at least I can be open to the fact that maybe somebody else's common ground or sense of balance ain't like mine.
Right. And it's really, for me, that escalation. I know within my own home, the escalation as I grew up of my father's or my mother's sense of logic versus my age difference. Like you said, the 60s were different than the 30s and the 40s when my parents grew up. And what was logical for a young teenager in the 60s was absolutely not logical for my parents during their time as teenagers. And yet, in the 20s, for my grandmother, what was logical in the 20s was just kind of coming around the corner again in the 60s. So, it's also, what time do we live in? What state of mind do we live in? Who's the hierarchy? Who's the authority that rules common sense? And that, to me, is where I have a rub. That's where I'm with Cyndi Lauper. It's like, wait a second. I have my understanding. First and foremost, I know I'm not crazy. I mean, I know that. I know I have done crazy things to other people's point of view. But it's worked out for me. So it was logical for me to live in my manner of life. My manner of life is not logical to a lot of people. And so therefore, we have to take into consider how not to absorb judgment and even be ashamed when our logic is in the judgment of others that agree that their logic is more quote unquote acceptable or viable or keeps one safe. My logic doesn't always keep other people safe. And what that means is because I had to move a lot, because I'm not in a stable relationship throughout my life, because of the way that I've traveled, the way I believe in spirit, the way I believe in God, the way I do my work. But what's fascinating is that the practice of my life, because there's an authenticity to it that is unique unto myself, it makes sense to me, and I don't impose it upon anybody else. So I think that's where some of the rub is also. My logic in my life works. And I express it with everybody else. I share it with everybody else. I invite anybody that wants to participate. But I do not make my life the rule. What happens when logic becomes somebody's demand of the rule? And it's illogical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jim Jones, drink the Kool-Aid.
Right.
That's not logical.
Right. But a lot of people will swallow the logical or swallow the rules.
Right.
And it becomes the logic, and it becomes the common ground and their form of common sense, where the rest of us can look at that and say, oh my God, they're not really going to drink out of that Dixie cup. And they did. And for whatever reason, they did. But one of the things that I really like that, hey, Cousin Donna, one of the things that I like that you just said, Sandy, is when somebody else's view or form of rule becomes what they expect everybody else's view to be. And so whatever happened to this idea that we can all be decent people but have a different view or a different set of common sense? I think for whatever reason, it's kind of flown out the window lately. At least I see it on social media enough that I just have to shut it down more often than I look at it. But for me, growing up in a household where we were encouraged to ask the question, so why do you believe that? Explain that to me. I want to know more about that. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to convert to Buddhism or Islam or any of that kind of a thing, but then I can understand, well, no wonder they look at it that way.
Well, see, that's just it. Having the opportunity to explain without someone being threatened by you being different or exploring something. When my family got into the psychic phenomena, it was so threatening to the common person in our community because it was new and it didn't make sense. But spirituality was I can't say spirituality was a part of our life. We were Catholic, and I don't see Catholicism as being spiritual the way I am spiritual today. But we had a religion, and so therefore we had prayer, and we went to church. But when we became known as people that know how to be a part of phenomena, that did not make sense. It was scary. And we were enthusiastic about it and, shared what we were doing. And today it's much more exposed. It's almost overexposed. It's amazing how it goes from don't talk about it to everybody's talking about it, to that place of does spirituality, not everybody's form of spirituality makes sense to me.
Right.
So, here we go in the spectrum again of, do I judge somebody or do I own that their cup of tea is not my cup of coffee? But it's a drink.
There you go.
And it's warm and it's hot and it's soothing and they like it in the morning, and I'll take a cup of tea if I have to. But if I ain't got my coffee, it doesn't make sense to wake up.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just starting to rain. How refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, tell me what you think about logic, common sense, and politics.
Well, it is one of those things that, for me, I like to, if I'm going to read something, usually Todd beats me to the research because he's a Taurus, but a long time ago, maybe because I worked at a newspaper for 33 years, right? And so I was in and amongst investigative journalists when there was such a thing, which is a whole other different topic, the media.
Right.
But back in the day when there were actually investigative reporters working at, newspapers the way they did, we were the editorial board, being privy to some of those things. You had to prove the facts. You had to investigate. You had to look it up. You had to prove it. You had to have the facts in front of you, not just take it because so-and-so on Facebook said something about somebody that happened. And so it didn't exist then. So I grew up with a newsroom. Always directly behind my office was a newsroom where they were always, looking to the core of the facts and getting right down to the root of everything. And so I believe that I've carried a lot of that over with me. Even in spirituality, I'm not somebody who's just going to, watch a 5-minute video and think that I'm the next high priestess of Avalon. You know what I'm saying? So for me, common sense means even in politics, do your homework.
Right.
And it's okay to disagree. My political viewpoint is completely opposite of my daughter and my son.
Uh-huh.
Two ends of the spectrum.
Right.
And we have conversation about it. And sometimes we laugh at the way that, we all come to our conclusions, or what conclusion settles in my heart okay, and what settles in their heart okay. But we can come to a place of, well, let's just not talk about that right now, or let's talk about this. And at the end of the day, we still love one another. I respect the fact that I have 2 grown adult people that I raised that are okay with not having the same thought form as their mama.
Exactly.
How wonderful is that? And I still love them, even though their political viewpoints are vastly different than mine.
Right.
I love the fact that I raised 2 adults who can critically think on their own.
Exactly. And therefore, the common sense is you're not the common denominator to what makes sense.
Yes.
And yet, what makes sense is to have the balance of you don't forfeit the love over the opinion.
Exactly. And I love that. And it's respectful. Is it respectful?
Yeah.
I was having a great conversation with my cousin Danielle a couple of months ago. She called, and I was sitting out on the lanai, and she called, and she said to me, Dana. I said, yes, Danielle. She said, are you one of them Bernie lovers? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure he's a pretty good guy, but no. And she said, oh, well, for some reason, I thought maybe you were a Bernie supporter. And I said, well, again, I think he's probably got some great ideas, but no. And we talked about it and we laughed about it. And, at the end of the day, the common ground is I love you. Your opinion and your thought, your common ground and your rationale is different than mine. Right. And okay. I still love you. And can you be respectful when somebody's common ground is not the same? I mean, what about you, Sand?
Well, I think the whole thing with, number one, growing up, if my opinion and my common sense threatens my parents' sense of authority over me, we've got trouble. Normally it's my trouble. But there was that place where my mother said to me later on, you're the only one who can talk sense into your father.
Oh.
Where I would go toe to toe with him to explain or to say, look, this is what's happening. And it was, I have to give you this example because it's so my father. Oh my God. I mean, this is 1964, going to the drive-in movie, and the stretch pants are popular with the stirrups. I mean, oh my God, they were fabulous. I had lost weight. I'm looking good. I'm young. And I come running down the steps, and my father's standing in the doorway, and Bill Langle's out the front in his Chevy, in his 58 Chevy, and we're going to go to the drive-in movie, and my father says, get upstairs and change. And it was like, what? Go put a skirt on. What kind of girl goes to the movies in pants?
Wow.
Said, do you know how much easier it is to have sex in a car with a skirt on?
What'd your daddy say?
I knew. It was like, Daddy, get over us. What? I'm not that kind of girl. I wasn't getting laid. But it was that common sense of that, like, what? His common sense was you had to be a lady to go out. And I was like, no, I have to be fashionable.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lady was to him was different than who I was, and I was a young lady.
Right.
His common sense wanted to keep me from having sex, and my common sense was I wasn't having it. So what's your problem? But to have to explain it, that because I look like I'm sexy or wearing tight clothes doesn't mean I'm not going to be a lady. Mm-hmm. So what's the common sense here? The common sense is I know how I'm going to be rather than you tell me I can't be because in your logic, I don't look like I'm going to be. And I mean, I'm saying something that is one of those things where women get accused all the time because we are looked at. The common sense to other people is, well, you look like that, so there you must be. And it's like, no, I've got enough common sense not to be. And how can we defend our reputation? How can we defend our morals? How can we defend our choices of our personal conduct when common sense to somebody says if you're not buttoned all the way up to the top of your throat holding your rosary piece, you're a hussy.
Clutching onto them thar beads.
I mean, you better be.
Oh, Lord.
So, yeah, I mean, there's that place of, but right now, I know that there's this place where, and even within my clientele, it's to listen to the anxiety that's going on out there.
Yeah. Yes.
To hear that people are losing their jobs, to hear that people are not getting money, to hear that what is normal. I wanted to go back to normal. We have to go back to normal. Common sense right now, to me, is that we are grieving the fact that we have lost what we are familiar with as normal. And there's a lot of displacement right now from what we have relied on as our normal, relied on as what makes sense to have a life and how to live a life, or what we need to do in order to feel like life is safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult to be able to grieve your lifestyle. We are grieving the loss of a lifestyle in America.
Yes.
And I don't think everybody knows that, because they're angry, they're furious, they're outraged, and they're frightened.
Yes.
But it is common sense to me that we are grieving, and we're out of touch with that.
Yes. We can look back, but we ain't going back.
Exactly. And there's an anxiety with it that is making people panic. There is where are the touchstones, where are the familiarities, where's the common denominator of I get up, I do this, I go do that, I talk to the people that I'm used to, I have a routine, and the routine no longer has any common sense to it.
Yes. Cousin Donna is saying yes, exclamation point. I can't wait for you and Donna to finally meet one day.
I'm Holly to drive out because it doesn't make sense to fly at the moment. Oh my God, I look forward to it, Donna. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so in that, I've got my goosebumps on my goosebumps right now. There's that place where once we step away from what has kept us safe, or the secret, or the common denominator that says, I can't be different than you, or if I am different, will you still love me? What makes sense is, and I do this with clients, is to risk experiencing the illogical so that it may become something that makes sense. Because that is the risk of growing. That is the risk of learning.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense to be stagnant and not grow. So,
Lady Hawk is weighing in with that makes sense. I have been so angry and not sure why. A lot of reasons it could be, but nothing really fit. And, everything that we find comforting or part of our history, let's just say, is being challenged. It's being torn apart. It's being torn asunder with zero or little regard to.
Well, the whiplash
Yes.
of daily information that doesn't make sense, or you think it makes sense and then it's gone, or it's like, what? There's no rational thing to hold on to, so we have to have a sense of ourselves.
Right.
And, if we keep looking outside ourselves for what makes sense, then, and I mean, let's be real here. What news program are you listening to? What subject matters are you looking for? How are you entertaining yourself, or how are you keeping yourself amped up so that what makes sense to you gives you a sense of who you are?
Mm-hmm.
Or what doesn't make sense to you is starting to develop an anxiety inside you.
Right.
This is a very big time for neurosis.
It's a huge time, absolutely a huge time for neurosis, and a time for fear and hypervigilance, to take over without any sense of balance or common ground, or frankly, in some cases, common decency.
Right.
And so those things that have been part of our story, whatever that might be, it might be regional, it might be historical, that's part of our story that's being challenged with so much, without so much as a question about, well, what does that mean to you?
Right.
How do you see that? Let's come to a common ground that maybe the way that I look at something isn't the way that you look at something. And maybe it's okay that we differ on that. And when we feel powerless is typically when our common sense goes right out the window. When we feel powerless, that what we treasure is being threatened or torn asunder, without any control, any input on our behalf, we can lose all sense of rationale. And it can become a mindset. Well, Sandy, you know, when all of the sexual abuse by priests started happening, all of a sudden, all Catholics, right, were under the spell of pedophiles.
Right.
And, you know, there were members of my family that left the Catholic Church because they couldn't bear what some of what was going on. And all of a sudden, an entire group of people around the world were known as followers of pedophiles or allowing for pedophilia, et cetera, et cetera. And it became a mindset. And when something like that comes under scrutiny or becomes viewed without a lack of common sense that says, well, not all priests are that way. In fact, I know some pretty cool priests, and not all nuns wrap everybody on the knuckle with a ruler. I know some pretty amazing nuns in my life. We take exception to that, and we can agree that, yes, there is pedophilia in all ranks of leadership, you know, from the Boy Scouts to whatever, but then we shouldn't lump everybody who goes to Mass on Sunday or belongs to the Boy Scouts under the umbrella of this is what you've allowed and this is what it means. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel very opinionated about that because there is that place where if you have one rotten apple, the whole barrel is bad, and that's not true.
Yes.
So there is that place where the few that are guilty are then unfortunately hidden with the mass that maybe, or the collective that's good, or the few that are good get taken away because they're assumed they belong to the bad. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, how do you see an individual? How do you hear? How do you risk having the common sense to know every single person is unique? I mean, that's what we're doing right now in anything that is racist. If you're black, you're that. If you're white, you're that. If you're yellow, you're that. Native American, you're that. And not all of the, if you're Jewish, you're that. If you're, I mean, there's a certain point of sophistication that happens when we expose ourselves to a larger demographic than our immediate home area. You know, if you only live in your house, then you only know what your parents and your siblings or your immediate family or your immediate neighborhood has to offer.
Right.
If you wander out and go into the city, then you get exposed to, oh, there's a store, there's this, there's that. And right now we are so incredibly globally available to anything and everything that I think the great veil of the dark is being revealed. The shadows are no longer just shimmering. It is blatant.
Yes.
And so the curiosity is, well, just how dark is it? It's as pitch dark as you want it to be if you look in the right direction. How light is it? It's as bright as it can possibly be if you look in that direction. And you're absolutely right, Dana. The balance is, who are we in the balance of that? We all have shadow. We all have light. And there's that beauty of what is common sense. For me, that beauty is if I take the time to really feel something and sense the truth of something, that I don't have to worry about whether I am illogical. I can understand that I have the ability to have faith and hope that there's something may be over, but life is not done.
Mm-hmm.
And there's logic, there's common sense to that, because sections of life throughout history always come to an end. Rebellion always rallies. I mean, the last time we were this chaotic would have been in the 60s. It would have been with Kennedy being shot, his brother being shot, Martin Luther King being shot, the Alabama uprising, the Black Panthers, the, sex, drugs, rock and roll. That was one of the great turnstiles of humanity. We are right there again. Common sense says this is historical.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of my clients, a young lady, I said, it is your generation's time to develop your own identity.
Mm-hmm.
The baton is being passed to you. It's the nest of being comfortable and safe always has to be challenged.
Yes.
Always.
Carla Joe is sharing a great quote here on Facebook, or excuse me, in our chat room. When something goes on, the populace tends to paint everyone with the 6-inch brush and not the 1/4-inch trimmer. That is brilliant. Absolutely. And so how do you stand in what you find when the common theme or the common sense of things is, or has been brushed over with the 6-inch brush? How do we stand humbly or with sturdy on our own 2 feet in knowing who we are, even though we differ from the populace or whatever upheaval is going on? Sandy, how do you stand firm and look in the mirror in the evening and go, I don't agree with most of that. I'll agree with that over there. And boy, if some people knew how I felt about that, I'd probably lose a few friends. But hey, at the end of the day, I'm a pretty doggone good woman, so I can sleep well tonight. How do you do that?
Well, I didn't always do that in the political sense, because I didn't have enough safety inside myself when things were so politically edgy in the 60s. I didn't vote. I did not vote because I felt I did not have a voice. It was too dangerous for me to pick somebody, and I was in a spiritual path. And so my choice was, it's not mine. I'm not interested in it. I have nothing to say about it. I'll, offer my opinion, but I'm not a political person. And then when Obama was about to be elected, it was like, wait a second, there's something inside me that wants to do something. And it was actually my husband who said, if you don't vote, you don't get a right to talk. And I was like, wait a minute, what?
Good one, Bobby.
I mean, he called my butt right down to the bottom of the steps.
Yeah.
And it was the first time, even though I'm a very opinionated person on lots of things, that I stood up for what I felt politically.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't because I was Republican or Democratic. It was because something was coming full circle from the 60s. Something moved me inside. Something about my consciousness voted. Something about my history voted. Something about, as a woman, Bobby just sent me I'll have to find it and send it to you, things that were just given the rights to women to have, that only started in the 70s and the 80s, like the right to have our body be ours, the right to take birth control, the right to have, that a woman was not allowed to have a credit card until the 70s in her own name without her husband's name on it?
Don't even get me started. You know, that's like some people, the common thought is that all women got the right to vote on the same day in this country. That's not true. Native American women didn't get to vote.
No.
African or black women didn't get to vote. White women could vote. But people don't realize there are separate dates, separate years in which women could vote.
Yes.
It's not just, Molly Hatchet walking around Battle Alley here in Michigan, Holly, Michigan. But, so those are the things that we find out and we go, wow, I didn't know that. And it puts things in a different perspective. If somebody's out there listening right now and they're thinking, what do you mean all women didn't get to vote on the same day? The suffragette movement didn't mean that every woman got to vote? No. No, they didn't.
Yep. and they were persecuted and prosecuted and thrown in jail for wanting to vote. There were secret meetings. And so I think I have a karmic tremor inside me at times of how do I stand up for myself. And there are times when you can't keep me down. I thought, Sandy, sit down and shut up. And it's like, too late. And there are other times it's like, I think I'll just let this one pass by.
Right.
So my common sense says this is a dangerous time or this is the right time. Right. I have stood up and been smacked down. I have stood up and stood firm. I've stayed in the corner sometimes. Just thought, I think it's best that I just be quiet.
Right.
But there's that place where if someone else is being hurt, if somebody is hurting a child, if a woman's, I have literally barged into people's apartments and pulled women out. Mm-hmm. When the common sense is you don't listen to a woman scream like that. You don't listen to a wall bang like that and not go get the woman. So my common sense is triggered by all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes common sense, can equal common decency. Tara is saying, yeah, this is a nice conversation, but sometimes I really want to bang my head against the wall when she sees common decency or just typical common sense go flying out the window. And I think it's, to what you were just talking about, common sense and common decency sometimes go hand in hand. And when do you stand up and say enough is enough? Enough already?
Well, it also depends. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, for me, there have been times that, I've been accused of diving in headlong and asking questions later, because sometimes common sense is somebody's being injured, somebody's being hurt here, and everybody else is standing around with a finger up their nose. Somebody's got to do something. And I've often been the person who then does something. And it either turns out really good for me or really bad. But in that moment, common sense said, Dana, get in there and do something about this.
And you do it even before the logic is triggered.
Bingo.
And that is also, well, it didn't make sense to put yourself in danger. But it made sense to be available to make a difference or to say something.
Yes.
And so, we're talking things here that are finite now. It's amazing. It makes me emotional. There's that place where common sense is sometimes things are not logical and you do it for the best of reasons.
Yes. Sometimes common sense comes from the heart and not necessarily the brain.
Exactly. Why did you run the fire? It doesn't make sense. Because I did.
Right.
Why did you break down that door? It doesn't make sense. Because I had to. I couldn't stop myself.
Right.
And so there's that place of in the moment, what's our passion? That's exactly what you said. What is logical to my heart? Oh God, how many people have common sense when it comes to love? I don't.
Right. Well, there's one. Right. Common sense says if he hits you or she hits you, leave.
Yeah.
There you go. That's pretty easy. If he hits you or she hits you, leave. And, people will live with it and go, that's love. Common sense is a whole other show. Maybe next month we'll do common sense in love.
Oh, boy.
There's a good one. There's a juicy one.
I was going to say, you want juicy conversation, it's going to start dripping.
There's no doubt about that. But you're right. Sometimes common sense doesn't look common to everybody else. And sometimes our own moral compass or our own sense of ourselves. I mean, anybody who knows me, I don't know. I'm not like, well, maybe I am. I mean, I'm definitely not a man hater. That's for sure. But when it comes to disrespecting women, if you want to get me up on a soapbox, talk about men who disrespect women in any way. And I'm on that. And that goes back in my history to being molested as a little girl.
Exactly.
And so when you're sexually molested at the ripe old age of 6, it leaves an imprint on you of abuse that I think informs your character. It informs the way that you live the rest of your life. And you become very sensitive to any form of abuse. But, and of course it goes both ways. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But in my case, it informed me at a very early age that common sense says that adult men do not do those things to little girls.
But did you have the common sense as a child to comprehend that?
No.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
But as I got older,
exactly,
it informs the way that I work at Gathering Thunder Foundation, what it is that we help with missing, murdered, and Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people and all of that. It informs the rest of my life that common sense says. And so if you want to get me riled up about a common sense thing, any man who's abusing his power with women, boy, that'll get me going quicker than anything.
All right.
And I have really good friends that are okay with men who are in states and positions of power, and they know are abusive to women, and they march on right behind them like little ducklings. Okay. But for me, common sense was informed at a very early age that, hey, wait a minute, because even at the age of 6, I knew it was wrong.
Well, there is that salacious moment where we want to be special.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden something feels creepy.
Exactly. Cousin Donna's saying, can people's upbringing affect their common sense? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And for me, that was one of those moments in my life. And I never told a soul until after my dad got home from Vietnam. And I'll never forget the evening. Dad was stationed on the island of Oahu, and there was a story, probably Walter Cronkite, good old Walter Cronkite. There was a news story about young Vietnamese girls who were becoming pregnant by American GIs.
Right.
And I mean, I was just a young girl, and I couldn't hold it in any longer because you don't know how long it takes to have a baby when you're a little girl. You don't know that. Right. And so that was the first night that I finally told. And it was years later. I held it in my little bitty body all of those years until I saw this Walter Cronkite special or whatever, black and white TV, Yeah. And I told, and I was told to never talk about it again. Don't you ever talk about it again. And I'm pretty sure the Sarge probably went to his grave never knowing that happened to me, because the Sarge probably would have looked somebody up to kill him. But it informed me of two things as a young girl. Number one, the act and what happened. And number two, you can say it, but never say it out loud again.
Right.
You keep that to yourself. So yeah, Donna, the way we're raised does inform our sense of common sense, of security, of where we're going to raise our voice or where we're not going to raise our voice. I mean, how has your upbringing influenced you, Sandy?
Oh, good God. The trauma of knowing if you opened your mouth, you were going to get somebody's fist shoved down it.
Right.
was traumatic to that place of fear of how do you tell someone what you really, really think?
Right.
How do you tell the truth? Or how do you tell what's happening when you know that the adult is going to punish you rather than the abuser?
Yes.
And that is something, I mean, if we're going to go down that path, that's where, when does the victim get believed?
Right.
When, it's common sense to me that if someone says, I have been hurt, that somebody says, how, rather than, oh, stop exaggerating. No, you didn't.
Right.
Oh, you're telling stories. Don't say that.
Right.
And, this is where the healer inside me with the common sense says, well, it is common sense that the guilty party is going to want to tell the everybody around them that the victim is lying.
Yes.
That's common sense, too.
Yes.
And that's kind of, it's like, wait a second, there's a broader stroke of reality here where you start realizing there's common sense to behavior.
Yes.
And, I mean, this is taking us in all sorts of, it's like we're at a, pinball machine right now. We're like, wow, well, if it's common sense to hear the victim, how do we trust what the victim is saying and take into our hearts that they're being very, very brave, that they're very traumatized, and the perpetrator is probably somewhere in the vicinity?
Yes.
And who's going to believe who?
Right.
Who's friends with the perpetrator?
Right.
Is it important to keep the perpetrator around?
Right.
And if it's a relative, you don't get much space.
Right. Well, and it goes back to something that you said earlier, and that is sometimes common sense comes with being mature through life experiences. Common sense that we know comes with understanding that if one thing happens, common sense says then this reaction is going to happen, and it doesn't mean being a Pollyanna. Common sense means you better be on your game, and you better be on the lookout, and you better be watchful.
There's also the reality of, back to your question, how do you stand up? Common sense for anybody that's been traumatized has to find out where the trauma is that they're either trying not to recreate, or they're trying to avoid, or they're trying to expose.
Yes.
And I say that because here I was, a teenager, making out down at the beach in goddamn, God bless Bill Engel, in the Chevy. And that Chevy has, we got to go find that Chevy, Dana.
You have a history with Chevys, I'm telling you.
There's a monumental Chevy out there.
Woo!
I mean, when you write your name on a steamy window, you know you've been making out.
Oh my!
So when I'm down in the throes of the beach in the Chevy, and the top knocks on the window, and there I am, literally about to have. I'm making out. We're petting heavy, and my pants are down, and there's, we're having oral sex. And so the policeman did not shame me in that moment, but he terrified me, because it was like, oh my God, now what? And all he said was, get dressed and take this girl home. Common sense in that moment, in my soul, heart, and body, and reality, was there was no way that a cop was going to escort me to my house and say no.
Mm-hmm.
Common sense was I would not be alive the next day. And my body went into terror, it went into rage, and I literally lost my mind in that car. I almost tore the car apart. The common sense of that policeman, and this is the most beautiful thing that may have happened to me as a teenager, came and knocked on the door, opened the door, and sat on the door jamb and talked me down, realizing that if I was brought home, I would have been in a whole lot more trouble. And he was able to talk with common sense about behavior and manners and making out, or if you have sex, or da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it was the intelligence of somebody that saw there's so much trauma in me that if he said, well, it's common sense, you take the girl home, you have to have them be punished, you have to be obedient, this is sexual, blah, blah. God only knows if it was a really bastard cop that knocked on that door, that liked to traumatize people. The common sense in that moment was my body said no. And the common sense in the policeman was you don't bring the lamb to the slaughter just because she's being a human being.
Wow.
And there's mercy in that.
Mm-hmm.
The common sense of that is somebody knew you don't hurt somebody when they're learning. You don't.
I like that.
You don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and where's my voice? My voice couldn't be stopped. You can't take me to my father. My voice finally got completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God the person that heard my voice listened to my voice.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
That's a pivotal moment in my life.
And bless that police officer.
Yes, and I was going to say, that's a good man.
That's a good man. Well, and Holly is bringing up, for some people it's common sense that you beat their children if they're out of line.
Exactly.
And you experienced that.
Absolutely. We were ravaged. I mean, it was common sense. I'll tell your father comes home, go get the belt, da-da-da-da, grab your ankles, blah, 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 blah,
yep.
blah, blah, blah.
Been there.
And unfortunately, it was the way that my father and mother thought you brought up your kids.
Right. For them, that was common sense.
That was common sense. I mean, we didn't know we were being beaten. We knew we were being beaten, but we didn't know we were being beaten. Right.
You didn't know that not everybody was getting beat.
No.
Right.
We didn't know everybody wasn't getting beat. It was like, it's like you didn't get beaten up for that. Your father didn't get you for that. It's like, what? Oh, I guess common sense. This is one of those great moments where my best girlfriend was having sex at 14 years old, and I'm still a virgin, and I went and visited her church, and she was Episcopalian or whoever she was. They had little cubes of bread and little cups of wine, and it was in a real New England kind of church. I mean, it wasn't Gothic and Baroque and all that Catholic stuff. I mean, this was that, everything was stark and white, and pews were rigid and other. And so I looked at her and I said, why are you taking the bread and the wine? And she goes, because that's what we do. And I said, but you didn't go to confession. She goes, what's confession? And I thought, honey, you're sinning your life. And you're not going to confess that? If I had a dirty foot, I had to confess it.
Well, yeah.
And it was, again, the common sense was, well, there was common sense that you don't go shame yourself and give your sins to a man that can judge you and then decide whether you're good enough to be with God or not. When I got old enough, it was common sense to decide not to be a part of that.
Right, and it does, sometimes common sense does come with age, and it comes with sophistication, as you said. I remember the first time that I went to Egypt, and I was stunned by the number of Egyptians that just wanted to stop and visit and talk and learn more about the Americanized version of the English language.
Wow.
And coming home and people saying, why on earth would you want to go to an Islamic country? Don't they hate Americans in Egypt? And I said, quite the opposite.
Right.
They're beautiful people. They're wonderful people. And so sometimes getting out of our own little neck of the woods or our own comfort zone brings us the sophistication to realize that what's common sense for one person may be based on an experience growing up.
Right.
But taking the time to consider it.
Well, I think that's kind of like the untying of all the knots. It's like, do we have the time to untie something, look at it, and risk that we're not going to lose ourselves
Right.
if we share ourselves, that we're not going to be hurt or beaten or killed if we speak our mind. I mean,
Right.
we are talking about a society where as women we have been punished over and over and again for opening our mouths.
Yes.
You asked for it.
Yes.
You opened your mouth. You asked for it. Just
Yes.
shut up. Da, 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 da.
Yes.
I mean, that is an ongoing reality.
Yes.
And so common sense says, be quiet.
Right.
And there's no rule of thumb when it comes to common sense other than risk developing it and be able to qualify it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the best things that we can really offer everybody is that think about what is sensible, what's sensible in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
what's real to you, what are you willing to risk in order to say you have an opinion or this is an observation or this is who I am.
Right.
I mean, to claim who we are is a powerful thing.
Right. Well, exactly. And being the voice of reason on behalf of ourselves isn't always going to make us the popular person.
Right.
It was a show that you and I did several years back. I guess it would be 6 years ago now. You and I did a show together on being adopted.
Right.
And we were talking about, for me, the reality of what it's like growing up as an adopted person. And that started a domino effect that utterly and completely changed the pattern of my life.
In what way?
Well, in a way that I was called out by my adoptive family who said, how dare you talk about the reality of some of the things you've experienced as the adopted kid in the family? How dare you?
Right.
And all that has happened. And the beauty of it is that the most beautiful things in the universe have happened since then. But sometimes standing up for common sense and being the person who says, well, you know what, these are some of the things that an adopted person thinks about.
Right.
This is the reality of being adopted. This is the reality of being a rehomed child. We do think about these things and we do feel these ways. And understanding that what's common sense for me as an adopted person isn't common sense for somebody who is not an adopted person.
You're absolutely right. The imprint is completely different.
Yes. Yeah.
And now there are how many children are finding their parents through Ancestry.com that are sperm donor children.
Yeah.
I have several clients that are sperm donor children. And it's like, oh my God, they never thought they would be able to. And they're finding, well, there's my father and there's several. He has a family, but because he was, making his money while he was going to Colombia by donating sperm. Oh my God.
Right.
And these people are just blown away with, oh my God, there's somebody that looks like me. They're the same age as me. They've got my smile or I've got them. It's like I can look in the mirror and know there's a familiar.
Right.
It's the common sense is there's also that logic of I belong.
Yes.
I belong.
Yes.
And just because someone picks you up out of the gutter doesn't mean that you have to be grateful.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like, I didn't ask to be rescued, but thank you very much.
Right. And frankly, because of that conversation you and I had those years ago, it started literally the process of me being completely and utterly disowned by my adoptive family, based on what we felt was just a very common sense conversation about something. And so sometimes what we think is common sense, and we may voice it, whatever it happens to be for anybody, like Holly being the only one to say, I don't think beating our children is a good thing. Sometimes being the person who just voices reason can get you into some hot water, which then can perpetuate the idea of maybe I am crazy, and maybe common sense really is this idea that I'm not supposed to say anything. So sometimes there's an element of common sense that says common sense means that everybody gets to voice and be who they are. You talked about that earlier. And maybe common decency says then that maybe we give that person space to be that authentic.
You're so on track with something so powerful and fragile all at the same time, because there is that thing of how does the adopted child mention something to the family that adopted her and bring up a reality that they may still be uncomfortable with.
Right.
And or don't have all the answers to of why you are even present in their life. Right. They have a need, but are you bigger than what their need is? Now they have to deal with you.
Right.
You know, that is common sense also, that just because somebody gets pregnant or you know, the child doesn't always have the best life.
Right. Well, and the beauty of that, I think that, you know, when we stand up and we voice, as you talked about earlier, common sense and the meaning of common sense changes with time. And it becomes, and it matures, and it becomes something more conscious, awake, and aware. And it really occurred to me a couple of weeks ago, a young woman who recently, or she's in the process of adopting a child. She brought her child to me, and he's still an infant and having some issues. And so she and I had this conversation about what it's like for him, even as an infant, to be consciously awake and aware to the fact that he is not with his biological mother. And how can she, as an adoptive mother, help to ease that? What are some of the things that I could recommend that she say to him or to provide him with to ease that? And that was a really profound moment for me, thinking that, you know what, the common sense back in the 60s was just take the kid and shut up, rename them, and just keep moving. Common sense around that today is let's have a conversation about this. Mm-hmm. And how might I be a better mother to this child? Isn't that wonderful? Common sense does change with the day and the age, and hopefully for the better.
Yeah. There's also permission to have a conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, we are a generation, we are the first generation, literally, that is able to talk about things at a level that you never had discussions about 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
This is the age of communication. A woman can speak up her mind. We can turn around and say you are a pervert. We can say you are a predator. And finally, the government is saying, okay, we'll listen to you. And finally, there's possibility that there will be prosecution to the powerful. So, you know, we're at a day and age where common sense is, why would a woman not be able to tell the truth, be believed, and not have her life ruined? Yeah. You're a whore, you're this, you're bad, you're that. And there's that beauty of for what you're talking about with children, is that it is now common sense to know that a child has its own thought process.
Yeah.
Its own body and need to bond. It's just not taken for granted. That we're learning something that nobody was interested in way back. Mm-hmm. That uniqueness of DNA, the uniqueness of life, the uniqueness of energy, and the way that we perceive is so expansive. I think, in all due respect, we're only starting to learn how to communicate, Dana.
Well, one of the most profound moments with this baby, and he's a baby, but he reached out to me, and of course I took him because I am kind of a baby magnet and I love babies. But I was holding him and I was talking to him and I was telling him how precious he is and that he is not a mistake.
Right.
And in that moment, I'll never forget what happened in that moment. This baby, without a sound, big, beautiful eyes, the tears ran down his eyes, out of his eyes, down his cheeks, and dripped off of his chin onto me without a sound.
Right.
As I was talking to him, and his mother and his grandmother just watched as I talked to his soul.
Exactly.
About who he is and where he came from and why he's here. And he just looked at me with this melancholy of she sees me.
Right. Already.
And our souls were connecting. And that would not have been commonsensical years back. But common sense was for this young mother, let's take him to see Dana and let's see how we can make a better place for his soul to be at peace.
Right. Well, nobody was talking about the soul back then.
Right.
So the miracle, again, the miracle that you're even an adopted child.
Yeah.
Who's done and doing her work, owning her identity, finding her blood, and finding out that there is no mistake when you're given the privilege to live.
Yes.
You're brought here, and we will find the way to express your life.
Yes.
And everybody's got a different venue. Everybody's got a different landing. I mean, God bless, we know that it's all different. And so for whatever happened to you, for you to touch this child so that their soul is already free from the burden, and the mother is already free from the guilt. I mean, there is that guilt of, I have an adopted child, but it's not mine.
Right.
But I want a child. How do I claim it? Will it want me? Will it trust me?
Yeah.
And that takes exactly what we were talking about. It takes the respect. It takes the decency. It takes the patience to learn. You gotta listen.
Yeah.
And don't take away the love.
Yes. Don't take away the love. And I love that. That's a really great way to wrap up the show, because we are all individuals who are unique and yet connected.
Yes, we are.
The one common thing that we can all, that I believe to be true anyway, is that we are all connected to everything, seen and unseen. For me, that's common sense. I'm connected to you, you're connected to me, we're connected to every living thing. And yet, every living thing is unique, with a unique sense of common sense, of decency, of what's right, of what's wrong, although our soul pretty much, I believe, informs us what's really right and what's really wrong. But we're all informed intellectually. And some of us stay in the intellectual capacity of a 5-year-old, of a 10-year-old, of an 18-year-old, arrested development, whatever it happens to be. Or we have opportunities to come into adulthood and recognize that we're all related and connected, and that we're all unique. Our stories are unique. And I think probably one of the most commonsensical things in this time, because this is quite an awakening here as we enter fully the age of Aquarius, is the common sense notion that rather than just jump on somebody on social media or what have you, take a minute, take a breath, investigate. Consider that maybe there's another way to look at something. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it or adopt it as your own.
Right.
And if you need to stand up, do it in a decent way. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I agree. And in that connection right now, again, we do have to take into consideration that there's a massive amount of mental illness out there.
Yes.
massive amount. And in that mental illness, there is narcissism, there is sense of entitlement, there is a low self-esteem, there's bullying, on social media, that whole thing of, am I being seen, shouldn't I be seen, do I tell the truth, do I lie, do I stalk? I mean, that's a whole other society.
Yes.
And me too. I've backed away. It's like they're just the porch needs to be held down today, so I'll just sit on the porch. It's just like it's important to stay connected, but it's not important for me to be sensationalized. It's like, take a breath, everybody. Everything is so anxious, hyper vigilant. And I think the best thing I can say, overexposed.
Yes.
Everything seems just a little overexposed.
Yeah.
And so what makes sense to me is that doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense to the generation that is really thriving with it. It really does that. I guess this is the way I was thinking about it actually this morning. It's funny how it all happened. When I was little, my mother's music was the music I was introduced to. But then my mother's and our music became the 50s rock and roll. My mother was kind of leaving, Benny Goodman and this, that, and the other thing. And then you had the crooners, and we would listen to, oh my God, it was Elvis Presley. And then my music was kind of like, oh my God, here come the Beatles. And my mother wasn't really a part of that anymore. It's like she couldn't quite hear what we were listening to because the Beatles were really coming up. And then our music was, oh my God, all this great music. And then, disco was good for me. But then when it got to be the rappers or whatever, headbangers, and like, no, that was my brother's music. That's not really my music. It's like, it's common sense to know that there's like a generation and a half of music that's good music. And then it's like, I'm driving around in my new car, listen to the 60s music because it just makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to listen to Justin Bieber, you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
And God bless his music.
Exactly.
It's just not my flavor. So, it's give me the Righteous Brothers. I'm okay.
I love that. I love
that.
So,
and it just makes sense that the vibration of what is, it's not, right now there is such a shift of consciousness.
Yes.
That I pray and I respect that the new guard, this next generation, is being thrown onto their swords. They have a lot on their plate to take care of for the next 50 years, and it's on them.
Yeah.
And they are being pulled to attention. They are being rattled. They are being told all that entitlement that, you get driven everywhere, you get taken everywhere, you get everything you want. It's not happening like that anymore. You just don't get your quick fix. If there's anything we are no longer getting, it's our quick fix.
Yes.
Everybody is in detox from withdrawal from something.
Yes.
And the moon just came out. The light is absolutely silvery. It's just kissing the whole deck. It's a beautiful silver night. Oh, my God, it's gorgeous.
Well, as we're entering into the weekend of Lugnasa or Lammas, right, the weekend of betwixt and between of the first harvest, happy birthday, Nikki Jorgensen, on the 2nd. Full moon on the 3rd. And for me, the full moon means, ceremony. Common sense says full moon means full ceremony. So common sense to me and common sense to someone else may differ, but the commonality is that we are all interrelated.
Yes.
And that's a pretty beautiful thing. And if we can only hold our own common sense in a moment, well, then we'll hold our own common sense in a moment. But Sandy, thanks for being with me tonight.
Oh, always, always. And thank you for everybody out there. Lily, have a sweet night. Carla, Joe, Catherine, who else? Donna, you take care.
Yep.
Thank you for joining in. The moon is just shimmering. It's just absolutely brilliant. So to sit on my deck on a night like no bugs, this is like, oh my God, home sweet home. So, and I hope I made sense.
Me too. With that, Sandy, good night, everybody. Have a beautiful
Good night,
evening.
everybody. I love you all. Bye-bye.
Good night, San.
Good night, Dana.